hardwire this to make sure that we're.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. Joe Biden wins in Georgia. Shocking in and of itself that a Democrat wins in Georgia. Ossoff, Warnock win in Georgia. Yes, I'll give you $2,000 if you put me in office. And they put those Democrats in office, and they won for the first time in my lifetime that I'm aware of in a runoff. So what do if you're the Republican Party? You just lost Georgia, of all places. Georgia, you can't even depend on Georgia. Do you go and you change your policies, something that you do in a representative government when you no longer represent the people in your particular district? Do you go and do the hard work of changing to make sure that you represent them? No, no. You figure out the problem. The problem is that there are too many black people voting in Georgia, and those people are putting people in office that we don't particularly like. And I'm being hyperbolic here. The issue is more on the political part, but still, for all intents and purposes, the effects of some of the new laws that they've just passed in Georgia, some of the most restrictive in the country, are taking place. And I would make the argument that they're doing that as a reaction to Ossoff, Warnock, and Biden barely, with the skin of their teeth, winning the state. To have a conversation about the new voting laws that they're passing in Georgia, we're joined by Greg Palast, best-selling author and journalist known for his investigative reporting for the BBC, The Guardian, The Rolling Stones. He's also bestsellers include The Best Democracy Money Can Buy. Greg, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us on such short notice.
Glad to be back.
Absolutely. So Georgia passes restrictive voting laws. Now, what's interesting about the way they've done this is that Kemp has basically argued, look, there was no cheating in Georgia. However, a lot of people believe it, and Donald Trump said it, and we need to make sure that people know that our elections are safe. And so we need to pass these voting laws. That's basically how he sold these laws. But just so we're clear, can you tell us about what these laws do? Are these laws really entire to make people safe? I mean, they get to the point of saying you can't even give people water. It's a criminal offense to give people water. What are the laws that these guys are passing? And are these laws really passed to make people safe, or are these laws passed to assist Republicans in staying in office?
Let's start with this. The only person who's safe is Jim Crow under these new laws. Look, the state of Georgia has been a blue state for the 8 years I've been covering Georgia for Rolling Stone, Al Jazeera, and The Guardian. 8 years ago, Martin Luther King III said, this is a blue state. So it's not a shock to me that it went blue. In fact, 8 years ago, I put Stacey Abrams and Reverend Warnock, now Senator Warnock, on national TV for the first time. They were saying, look, this is, by the way, Georgia as of this year, if the census numbers come out honestly, is now a minority majority state. White people are in the minority. It's not surprising that it went Democratic. It's a very simple, the issue is simple. Will you let people vote? And in Georgia, they do everything to stop it. And this didn't just begin with this so-called, this new restrictive, what Joe Biden calls the new Jim Crow law of Georgia. And so let me enumerate a few things. I'm the reporter that broke the fact that it's a felony crime in Georgia. By the way, it already was. They just strengthened it. A felony crime in Georgia to hand someone pizza or a bottle of water. Because I mentioned pizza, and I started with that. That's been picked up because I saw this crime committed. If you go to gregpalast.com, you can see a little film of me in Cobb County where you have the criminal Papa John's pizza pushing gang handing out calzones. That's pocket pizzas for those of you in South Dakota. And pocket pizzas and bottles of water. And I asked them, are you bribing voters? This is a felony crime. You can go to jail for a minimum of 1 year in Georgia for handing someone a calzone while they're standing in line or water. Now, that's the beginning. But you have to understand why there are 3 and 4 and 6 and 8 and 12-hour lines in Georgia in African-American areas, Hispanic, and in Asian-American neighborhoods. They're the new group under attack. So, for example, in Cobb County, where I took this film of Papa John's trying to feed the starving citizens illegally, Cobb County had 11 early voting stations. That's it for 500,000 people in a big county that includes a hunk of Atlanta. But when Biden won Cobb County, and understand this is Newt Gingrich's district, this is right-wing Republican turf, yet Biden won with the massive number of new non-white voters. So they closed 6 of the 11 early voting stations, all 6 in the African American neighborhoods, requiring black folk to drive as far as 20 miles. We met some people who showed up at their polling station, then had to drive 20 miles to the white polling station. So of course now the lines are massive. Now they're going to make this worse. In Georgia, like in most places, most people mailed in their ballots because of the virus. But America's been moving to majority mail-in ballots already. We already were 30% before the virus. So a lot of states, including Georgia, and especially in Fulton County in the Atlanta area, they put out drop boxes because no one can or should trust the post office to get your ballot in on time. I had one gentleman who mailed in his ballot 10 days early and it was still marked late. So they have drop boxes which are picked up every night by the elections board. What they've done now is they've eliminated 2/3 of the drop boxes under this new law. They've also said you can't drop off your ballot in the drop box, at any time. It can only be during business hours. The whole point of a drop box so people can do it after work. And by the way, it's not like it's insecure. There are video cameras on these boxes. They're highly secure, and no one has said that a single vote in a drop box was illegal. Not a single vote. Yet they're removing these drop boxes. So once again, you're going to have massive lines. They're cutting out, while they didn't cut out all souls to the polls days, they restricted the hours of weekend voting in Georgia. And of course, that's when most African Americans and Hispanics vote on what generally called souls to the polls days, because people don't have cars, especially older people. So they go in the church van after church. They have to stop that. So they stop that. Again, that brings lines longer. There are many other things which I am about to write about. If you go to gregpalast.com, watch that spot, because I'll be putting out a news story on new hidden horrors besides no pizza, making pizza a felony. 2 other things that I noticed. By the way, the bill is 95 pages long. I haven't gotten through it all. Every page is a new horror show. It looks like Stephen King wrote it. It's horrifying. So terrifying. But one of the things is that any voter, are you ready for this? Any voter in Georgia can challenge any other voter's right to vote in Georgia. Literally.
Wow.
So I don't that guy with the kind of, dark skin, he shouldn't vote. And it says that there is no limit to the number of people you can challenge. Now, why is this important? This ain't theoretical. Last year in the general election and this year in the runoff in Georgia, I was down there, and go to gregpalast.com. You'll see tons of my reports out of Georgia, and for Democracy Now! and other outlets. You had a group called True the Vote, which was mass challenging voters of color. 20,000 voters in a single county they challenged on whatever cockamamie grounds. Now, all these things were thrown out by local elections boards and courts, saying, number one, there's a limit to the number of voters you can challenge. You have to know who that voter is. You can't just say, I don't like Shane Stranahan here, your producer. He can't vote. Well, do you know Shane? No. Do you know why he can't vote? Have you ever met him? Well, how do you know he's an illegal voter? So what they did was they used ways of figuring out it's not that difficult to figure out who were the voters they didn't like. We know people's registration. We certainly know their color and their neighborhoods. And they challenged in one county 20,000 voters and so that was thrown out. So they did 2 things. One, they made it legal to mount these challenges. They say, oh, big deal. Then the voter just has to go into a hearing. It's like you've been hauled into court on the basis of no evidence. And if you don't show up to this, take a day off work and show up because some white supremacist has tagged Jesse Jackson and said you can't vote, and you say, oh, no, I can vote. And then they say, okay, well, you can vote. Well, excuse me. You just lost a day of work, and that's not everyone who is being targeted, and it's been racial. In addition, they used to leave that up to the elections boards to determine if a challenge was reasonable. And I have to say, in due credit to some of the local boards, a lot of the local commissioners said, you can't challenge these voters. These are our neighbors. You have no basis for this. We don't have any illegal voters here. And so even Republican-controlled boards began to reject these challenges. So what has the legislature done? It says that the local boards no longer have the final say. It will now be up to the state elections board. And the state elections board, they've removed the Secretary of State. They've removed independent members of the board. The board will now be made up of the legislative leaders of Georgia, who are the MAGA maggots. They're basically Trump stormtroopers. There's no other way to put it. And they will be in charge of determining if those 20,000 people in a single county can be challenged. So that's just, and like I say, it's 95 pages long. That's just the highlights of the horror show.
So while a lot of national media has been focused on the call between Trump and Secretary of Brad Raffensperger, Secretary of State, or Attorney General, pardon me, for Georgia, what you're saying is there is a deeper crime here. There's a deeper problem going on. And you see this in the bill that was recently passed in the state of Georgia. I mean, you brought up a few of the key highlights here. Here's where I would go with this. We only have a couple minutes left in this segment. We're going to be coming back with you in the next. Voting rights and allegations of voting fraud and election fraud more generally are more significant issues, I would say, now at this point in American politics than they ever have been before. To the point where literally earlier this year, inaugurating this year, after just a few weeks before the actual presidential inauguration, you saw an unprecedented riot, breach of the Capitol, insurrection, whatever word you want to use to define that event, which was manned by people, hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands even of people who thought that there are serious electoral abnormalities in terms of rampant voter fraud. That is the call from the right. For a long time, I've heard calls from the left that there is widespread abuses of voter rights. If you had to explain to somebody, and I want to come back to this on the other side of this break, if you had to explain to somebody who was in the center or was on the right wing even, what are they getting wrong here? If you had to make the case that there are far more abuses of people's right to vote than there are fraudulent voters, how would you focus that argument? What case would you make, Greg, in our couple minutes here?
Okay, let's distinguish two things, really important. There's voter fraud, that is voters committing these frauds, black people voting twice. And, there's a program called Interstate Crosscheck, which accused literally 1 million black people of voting twice. And Georgia used that program to eliminate voters. And that's also, by the way, in the new law, this new mass purge program. That's voters committing that crime. But you know what? They don't. Georgia removed all these people from the voter rolls on grounds that they were registered in 2 states. In fact, not one, 0. There was also they said that people were moving because were voting who lived in other states, including, for example, I was with Christine Jordan, 92 years old when she went to vote for Stacey Abrams. She was thrown out of the polling station, 92 years old, because they said she no longer lived in Atlanta, so she was an illegal voter. So I went to the home of this criminal voter, and there was Martin Luther King's picture on the wall at that house, having dinner with her, so which means that she had to be there at least a half a century. So that's voter fraud, and it doesn't exist. And that's what Trump is claiming. People filling out ballots illegally, Hugo Chavez coming back from the grave and mailing in millions of mail-in ballots, all that nonsense. But what's real is vote suppression. That's when the voters are defrauded by the state, removing Mrs. Jordan from the voter rolls, closing voting stations in the African-American neighborhoods, disregarding and rejecting absentee ballots because they claim 54% of the ballots that were rejected for so-called signature mismatch were cast by African-Americans. So let me again distinguish. There is voter fraud, voters committing fraud. That's the Trump line. That's the right-wing line. And you know what? Where are these illegal voters? If you show them to me, I'll arrest them myself. It's a felony crime.
All right,
but
Greg.
But
we
the
need
other
to go to a break.
is vote suppression.
I hear you on that one completely. We got to go into a break. For those listening, we are joined by Greg Palast, best-selling author and journalist known for his investigative reports for BBC, The Guardian, and Rolling Stone. His bestsellers include The Best Democracy Money Can Buy. You can follow Greg's work, by the way, on Twitter at Greg_Palast and also on his website, gregpalast.com. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We're going into a break, but we'll be back in just a minute with Greg. Be right back.
All right, let's come back. Greg, thank you. Now, this is only going to be about 13, I believe. I am going to go into the case where you were able to sue Kemp, because I kind of want to make the point that this is not new. This has been going on for a very long time. Disenfranchising black voters in the South is as American as apple pie. They just got more slick with it. It's like, hey, this last name is Chin. And this person's name is Chin. I guess she's voting twice. Let's get rid of her. Like that nonsense.
Yes, well, that's exactly what we've been suing on, and we're going ahead with it. So yeah, that'd be great.
Okay, so let's go back once more into the breach. All right. Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. So we've been having a conversation about voting. I want to go back to 1980 by a gentleman named Paul Weyrich, founder of the Republican think tank, the Heritage Foundation, and ALEC. He gives this fiery speech. I don't want everybody to vote. Our leverage in the election goes up as the voting populace goes down. Think about that. He's arguing that basically his ability to win an election goes up as the number of people to vote go down. I want less people to vote. And an exhaustive study found, I need to find a year for this, but they only found 10 cases of voter fraud out of 600 million votes cast. Think about that. Now, Republicans and the laws that these guys are passing are disenfranchising thousands, potentially hundreds of thousands of voters all across the United States as these guys pass these laws. And yet, 10 cases and 600 million votes. The gentleman that we have with us was one of the people who sued Brian Kemp, and I kind of want to get into that. Greg Palast. Now, Greg Palast is a best-selling author and journalist known for his investigative reporting for the BBC, The Guardian, and The Rolling Stone. His bestsellers include The Best Democracy Money Can Buy, and you can follow Greg on Twitter at Greg Palast, and on his website, gregpalast.com. Check out that website. Greg has all sorts of work there, and good work. I followed your site for a while now, Greg. Thank you. Greg, welcome to the show. Well, welcome back, I should say.
I'm glad to be back with you.
Absolutely. You sued Governor Kemp.
Yes.
And I want to make the point, and the reason why I read that and went back in history, because I wanted to make the point that this is as American as apple pie. This is something that has taken place for a very long time. You've had Republicans that argued when Obama was running against Mitt Romney. I think the gentleman from Pennsylvania, that voter ID laws is going to help Mitt Romney win Pennsylvania for the first time in God knows how many years. It's like, whoa, that's a slip of the tongue. Like these laws, these things that they were putting in place was basically to shave off, either eliminate from the voting rolls, or find ways to mitigate just percentages. I mean, look how much Biden won Georgia. It was just a few percentage points. If you do policy that you know is going to shave off just 1 or 2%, that is all you need to win that state. Am I wrong, Greg?
You've got it, unfortunately, exactly right. And yes, I've not only sued Brian Kemp, who was Secretary of State and now and swiped his way into the governor's office, but his successor, Brad Raffensperger. By the way, it's not Raffensperger, as everyone mispronounced it. Really, his name really is Perger, and he's been purging the rules.
Thank you.
He was born to this
correction.
job. Now, let's go through a couple of things. Why did I sue? I'm a journalist. And they were locking up their records. Now, I'm an investigative journalist, you can tell by the hat. And so what I was able to do was get out of Brian Kemp's office internal documents working through. I've got a team in there, and I want to thank Zach D. Roberts especially for basically being able to we don't do anything illegal. We just talk them out of insiders into giving us internal documents. And what we found is that the state of Georgia was using a system. Chris Kobach of Kansas. Now, Chris Kobach of Kansas, if you can't remember the name, just think KKK, came up with this list of people he said were voting twice. Now, how does he know people are voting twice? That's a go to jail crime. And how many people? He had 7.3 million suspects on the list, including half a million so-called double voters in Georgia. 1 in 12 voters. But interestingly, not just anyone. the names were suspiciously Jackson and Rodriguez and Garcia. How did they create this list? They simply said, Jose Garcia is voting in Kansas. Jose Garcia is voting in Georgia. They obviously must be the same person. John Black is voting in Michigan, and John Black is voting in Georgia. So obviously, John Black is the same voter voting twice. Even though, by the way, when I got a hold of the internal list, 2 million names had mismatched middle names. 250,000 matched, for example, James Brown Jr. and James Brown Sr. And we had 3,500 Michael Jacksons. Now, I'm not kidding you. And you say, well, Michael Jackson's just a common name. Not for a Republican. Okay, so you're getting the idea. 85 of the 100 most common last names in America, according to the census, 85 of 100 are minority names like Rodriguez, Kim, Ho, Chung, Jackson, Washington. That's what the history of slavery and the history of immigration is, that the minorities have common names. And so they remove the common names, that is minority voters, and that's how you win elections. Now remember, you said Biden won by a couple hundredths of a percent, 12,000 votes. If they had been able to purge 12,000 more voters, Biden would have lost Georgia. And they used the same system, by the way, in Wisconsin. He only won Wisconsin. So he won Georgia, Biden, by 12,000. He won Wisconsin by less than 20,000. And I got to tell you that so we sued in Georgia. When I say we, I sued with the Reverend Joseph Lowry's organization. He passed away, is the Campaign for New Georgia. And we sued, and now, and we were able to we won in federal court. In fact, he had to pay my lawyers their fees. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Kemp. We beat him in federal court, saying you have to open your files. That's what I need as a journalist, not just what I can sneak out of your office. Open your files. They're the public files. You're removing voters. So we won that case and got the information. Now, Black Voters Matter has filed a lawsuit based on what we then found. And what we found was that they have removed 198,135 voters exactly. We have their names and addresses of people, like I mentioned earlier, a Mrs. Jordan, Martin Luther King's 92-year-old cousin, people that they said moved out of Georgia, moved out of Atlanta, and they never moved anywhere. They're still in their homes. 200,000 people. So we're back in court. And this is before the new law. The new law allows more purges, more challenges, more games. But to say that they suddenly panicked and now they're putting in Jim Crow laws, no. You have to understand that the teeny margin of Joe Biden and the small margins of Warnock and Ossoff are only small because they illegally removed 200,000 voters, because they closed voting stations, because they rejected mail-in ballots, because they passed out what are called provisional ballots like candy to African-American voters, and which then were disqualified. So Jim Crow in Georgia and in many other states above the Mason-Dixon line. Let me tell you, we did a report for Black Voters Matter in Wisconsin challenging the removal of 135,000 voters. But here's the good news there. The bipartisan election board agreed with us, and they did not. They reversed the removal of the 135,000 voters that they said had moved. We went through name by name. We hired the top experts in address verification, including an agency called the United States Post Office. They know where you live, okay? They know where you live. And they said 100,000 of these people never moved. But they were guilty of voting while Black in Milwaukee or voting while student in Madison. If we hadn't been able, if that purge of voters had gone through, Joe Biden would not be president. He would have lost Wisconsin. If we hadn't blocked them in Georgia, he would have lost Georgia. And they had similar purges in Arizona. I'm telling you, if it weren't for the voting rights groups fighting like crazy, including ours exposing things and working, and we again, and by the way, that my report was issued by the ACLU of Georgia. If it weren't for the ACLU, if it weren't for Black Voters Matter, if it weren't for the Reverend Joseph Lowry's organizations and other fighting groups, And of course, Stacey Abrams' fair fight. I did work with Stacey Abrams' fair fight once she was no longer a candidate. I don't do partisan stuff. If it weren't for these groups, Biden would not be president. That is the vote. And it's not whether I'm for Joe Biden. I wasn't there to campaign for Biden. I was there to say, let the voters make the choice. If the voters choose Trump, hey, that's democracy. But they didn't want the voters to choose. They wanted Jim Crow to choose. And that's why we sued. And that's why we're still in federal court with Kemp's henchman replacement, Brad Raffensperger, who's been, by the way, played as some type of phony hero because he released the tapes of Donald Trump muscling him to try to find more votes. You have to understand, this guy already stole a bunch of votes for Trump. He just couldn't steal any more without going to prison.
Let me ask you this. It's something that I've always been curious about. It doesn't make sense to me. Or maybe it does. I don't know. Why don't they challenge the election when it seems like the election is dodgy? So, for example, you had a situation where Hillary Clinton in Wisconsin, and they wait and let Jill Stein challenge the election in Wisconsin as opposed to Hillary Clinton challenging the election. It seems like it should matter. I mean, even if you look back at Al Gore, refuses to challenge Florida, like talking about this kind of full-throated pushback. It just, even Sanders, like the weirdness that was taking place within the context of the primary in the first 2016 election, they never pushed back on that. And I get it's a hot rail, but it's a hot rail to a certain extent. At a certain point, you're failing your voters, and the people who are backing you up, you don't necessarily look at that and say, okay, that looks a little dodgy. Am I wrong in that? Like, am I missing?
No, you got it right. In fact, this is a huge, there's a civil war within the Democratic Party. There's basically two parties. There's the white Democratic Party and there's the black Democratic Party. These are two parties. They're not the same. And in fact, in the South, they used to have a different name. They actually were called the Freedom Democrats for years. And so you have to understand this internal war. The white Democratic Party, for example, in Michigan, you talk about Wisconsin, Michigan, in the Hillary Clinton race. Hillary Clinton lost Michigan supposedly by 10,700 votes. However, 75,000 votes were never counted in Detroit because machines broke down. They could have been counted by hand, and that's what Jill Stein did. She paid for the hand recount until it was stopped by Donald Trump's lawyers. If they had counted all the votes, in other words, they took the votes kicked out by the bad machines and just looked at who they started the recount. I busted that story for Democracy Now! And so why wasn't Hillary Clinton there? Why was it Jill Stein of the Green Party, who, by the way, Hillary Clinton called a Russian agent? Well, how come the Russian agent was trying
to like, thanks a lot, right?
Right. Hey, Hillary, how many Russian agents do you know are trying to save you the election? Okay, well, they say Jill Stein was trying to save the election over not only the silence of the Democratic Party, but this year, believe it or not, this year, when the Palast Investigative Fund, that's my foundation, when we and Black Voters Matter put up a list of voters in Michigan whom the Republican secretaries of state, the Republicans, when they controlled the state, had removed a couple 100,000 voters illegally. We put up the list so that you could re-register. Hey, re-register. And we were shut down by the Democratic Secretary of State and the Democratic Attorney General saying you are disparaging Michigan elections. Yeah, I'm disparaging Michigan elections. They're Jim Crow elections. I know you don't want that. The white Democratic Party does not want black control out of Detroit of their party. They want just enough to win, but you know what? Even if they lose the presidential slot, they don't want to lose control of their party. There's a fear of a black party, and that's just the truth of it. So you have within the Democratic Party a great deal of resistance to the power of the black vote. Stacey Abrams was internally vilified by the Democratic Party, not supported, vilified.
I do remember
she helped carry Georgia against the will of the Democratic Party. They'd given up. Now, I will say somehow, maybe because he's got Kamala Harris, I don't know what it is, but kind of Joe Biden's joined the black party, black Democratic Party. This week, I got to say, you can't complain.
Greg, I'm going to thank you. We're going to have to end it here because we're hitting up against an hour. But Greg, thank you for joining us, man. That's a phenomenal rundown in regards to an explanation of what is taking place, especially in Georgia and especially within the context of the party and your work on this. So thank you. Greg Palast is best-selling author, journalist, best known for the investigative reports for the BBC, The Guardian, The Rolling Stone. His bestsellers include The Best Democracy Money Can Buy. You can follow Greg's work on Twitter at Greg_Palast, and there's a website, gregpalast.com. Check out that website. The website is awesome. Greg, thank you very much, man. I really appreciate this. And we are done. Greg, thank you. I really appreciate this, especially on such short notice.